without a doubt, this is probably the most interesting news that's come out of the scene in the past, like, 5 days. I mean, the Alfire news was incredibly good for Team Liquid, and now they made this one with the Perks going to Cloud9 today. I mean, I think it's incredibly good for the scene in general. I think even though, again, we're not promoting a lot of our own people and promoting a lot of NA talent, I think that bringing in more competition for the NA players to have to try and compete against is good for everybody. And Perks right now, as it stands, is probably going to be like one of the best mid laners, if not the best mid laner inside of the NA scene. He's been, without a doubt, one of the best mid laners of all time coming out of the West, and he's coming into the NA scene with a really large discrepancy in power right now. I mean, again, we lost probably the best mid laner inside of the NA scene with Bjergsen stepping down from his position, and now we pretty much just have Power of Evil and Jensen fighting for that number one spot, and I think Perks is probably going to be the solid number one person. But again, Perks did have a little chop and like a kind of a downgrade in what I would say was how good he was from his previous tenure as a mid laner. I think he's not quite as good as, like, obviously Caps and all that stuff, but again, he is still one of the best mid laners inside of the entire Western scene. And again, he didn't really have that much time to accustom himself to the mid lane starting position. He brings a lot to the table. He has a lot of versatility, again, with the ability to play ADCs, which is actually incredible in my opinion. His Corki is amazing. His ability to play assassins, bringing that to the table, something Niski could never do. It's really incredible for Cloud9. Gives them a lot more to do inside of the drafting phase. They have a lot more flexibility. I mean, I think one of the best things that Perks is going to be bringing to the team, though, is probably going to be his ability to be a leader inside of a team. We've seen what he was able to do with G2, his attitude and like pretty much keeping the team in check when it comes to just their negative attitudes. With him on the team, I think there's going to be a lot less of that. I do think he's meant to be a mid laner. His ADC skills, especially this year specifically, have been a little bit questionable. He's been a lot better on mage or ability-based ADCs like Lucian or Xayah and all that stuff. And I think that we're going to see him look a lot better this year because he's going to have a full-time year to be able to play inside of the ADC position. Again, I don't want to say he didn't play well during this past season as a mid laner. He looked incredibly good inside of the playoffs, except for that Rumble game inside of the end part of the Mad Lions series where he went like 0-9 or something. Like, all around, I think that Perks is probably going to be the best mid laner in the league. And it all comes down to the roster, though. The reason I don't think Cloud9 is going to be the best team right now because of, in comparison to Team Liquid, is first off, the Fudge. I think that all around Fudge right now, with Licorice playing how poorly he did at the big end of the season, I do think maybe at the very least putting competition in the way is a good idea for them, because as it stands, the way that Licorice was played is not acceptable for a team trying to compete for a world spot. But at the same time, Fudge is not nearly as good as Licorice is when he's playing well. I think that's one of the biggest problems that I'm going to have with this, is the fact that we're going to have an arguably, not even really arguably, a worse top laner than we had in Licorice inside of Fudge. Even though Fudge is no longer an import slot, he's not nearly as good as what I would say is prime Licorice. But again, he has a lot of potential. He's the single best laning, probably the best laner, like solo laner inside of the whole academy scene. So whatever that's worth, I think we're going to see a lot of potential. He has a high ceiling, and honestly, maybe he's going to be better than Licorice in the future. I don't know, but as it stands, I really didn't see that level of play that I saw out of Licorice when he in terms of just his domination inside the laning phase and his ability to play weak side and all that stuff. I don't see that much in terms of just what Fudge brings to the table. But at the same time, Perks coming to this team is going to make this, without a doubt, one of the top 3 teams in the league. FlyQuest took a very large hit with their roster moves so far. TSM looks a lot better. Team Liquid looks a lot better, and I think that right now Cloud9 seems to be making one of the larger leaps. Again, I think one of the biggest question marks for me right now is going to be how well not only Perks and Sven gel well back together, whether or not their past time as teammates would be able to make them be able to function well as a whole unit, and how much honestly the leadership capabilities this team actually did not have last year. When they fell apart, there was no one to pick this team back up, and I think that's something this team is really going to benefit from with Perks, because Perks really does have that leadership mentality that this team needs. I mean, obviously Niski never had it. Niski seemed to be that Niski didn't really like when the team fell apart. It seemed to be like off the bat of him playing poorly too, and really, I mean, when it comes down to them executing well in terms of just how they play the game, and then not being able to not being able to not being able to like kind of capitalize once they start playing poorly. Even though you can play and you understand the game to a really decent extent, if you can't consistently play well, and that's really you can't play well. Like what's it called? When one of your biggest pieces is not performing to their standard, then you're not going to be able to be able to. Jeez, man, not going to be able to keep that level of play. You're not going to be able to compete with the best teams because your best player, especially when it's the mid laner that's not really a laning prodigy, is not able to play to his best capabilities and not able to play well against some of the better mid laners, and that kind of stifles all of your plays around the maps. Then you're not going to be a good team. I think that's what Perks brings to the table. Even when he's not playing well, even when he's behind, I think he's still able to shot call pretty well, something that the rest of the team wasn't able to do. This is going to bring a lot more coordination to the team. They're going to become a more cohesive unit when it comes to mid-game rotations. And again, I think we're going to see probably a better version of what I would say is the mid-game transition that we saw from Cloud9 in the early spring parts of it. When they actually got a lead, they ended up taking over the game, and no one could really come back from that. I think we're going to see a lot more of that coming out of this Cloud9 this season, because they have, honestly, what I would say is a better shot caller. The coaching staff is going to be a big question mark, because, again, one of the biggest positives I saw to this team last year, or this year specifically, was the ability for them to be able to draft properly in terms of just what they were be able to, like what they wanted to do, like drafted a specific plan in mind and then be able to execute based on that. I mean, again, they started towards the later half of the season resorting to a lot of Ezreal Yumi comps and all that stuff, but it all came down to the fact that no one on their team was properly coordinated. No one was playing well, and I think that's kind of the biggest reason as to why they weren't able to draft as versatile, as many different comps as they were able to at the beginning of the season. Because again, when your top lane, your mid lane and jungle are all underperforming to a drastic extent, and the only one that's really performing well is the bot lane, you really can't play around anything but the bot lane. They can't rely on them to peel, so I think that it kind of hindered them on what they were able to draft. I mean, I'm not sure if this drafting kind of choice or the coaching staff changes is going to be a good idea, but I do hope that they have a better plan in mind, because again, if Raynors are making a larger portion of the decisions, I can respect that. I can respect the changes, but I don't really know if that's the case or not. Again, Perks is still an incredibly good asset to this team. There's going to be a lot more, even better in terms of just flexibility from the spring split at Cloud9 that we saw dominate. There's going to be a lot more champion pools going to be able to be kind of rotated around with the new changes and items coming in. Assassins are going to be really viable in the beginning of half of the season. Tanks and fighters are all going to be viable. I think we're going to see actually, you know what? I mean, maybe not specifically bruisers, but I mean, we're going to see a lot of ADCs going to be pretty decent shape. All around, I think that this specific next season is going to be a really good indicator of whether or not how good Perk still is in the mid lane. And I really do think this is going to be a top 2 team. I think without a doubt. I still think with the changes, they look better than TSM. I think they're going to be lagging behind Team Liquid just purely because of how good I think Core JJ is. I think he's going to be a lot better for next season's meta because of how much power they're giving it to the support. It's going to be a lot more impactful, and I think that the difference between him and Vulcan is pretty decent. Even though I think Vulcan is a decently a really incredible support, I think that the difference between him and Core JJ is going to be the difference between why I think these teams are a little bit more why it's a little more lopsided in terms of Team Liquid's favor, and on top of the fact that the laning difference between Alphari and Fudge is going to be extraordinary in my opinion. So all around, I think that this is a really good pickup for Cloud9. They're going to address a lot of their issues with this pickup. I don't know what they're going to do about the top lane issue. I'm not sure how good Fudge is. I've only watched it probably 5 to 10 of his games. Again, he's the single best laning top laner and single best laner in general inside of the academy scene, but what does that translate into the LCS scene? I mean, not like there's much different competition, honestly. Dokla, all that stuff in the academy scene is probably decently close to the level of Viper and Ruin, so it's not like the transition to the LCS is extraordinary. I think there's there's still a lot better players in the LCS, but again, there's a lot of bad players too. So I still think he's going to be a top lane, a top 5 top laner. But again, This is going to make it to where the Cloud9 can actually play around at something other than bot. I think they're going to have a lot more weak side top lane matchups, though, which is going to be something that I think Fudge might actually struggle on, and we're going to have to see whether or not he's able to do that. But I think that's pretty much it. I'm excited for this season. NA looks a lot better, and I think they're going to be, at the very least, able to compete internationally with some of the lower tier teams. I think they might be able to compete with EU now in some specific teams, and hopefully that makes the difference. Hopefully that makes up the discrepancy between the two regions, because it's not really fun being the premier fourth best team in the world, able to take some games off of like EU every once in a while and China, but for the most part not being really able to compete with them. Hopefully this makes the difference, because this is a lot of star players coming into the NA scene, really kind of picking up the level of play that we're going to be able to see inside of the scene. So I think that's pretty much it, and see you later.